The award-winning film Black Klansman is based on the life of Ron Stallworth as he infiltrates the Ku Klux Klan posing as a white person on the phone. His adventures actually got him an apology from the Grand Wizard, David Duke, for the delay in his membership into the Klan. This, of course, was all part of his undercover work as a police officer. The story would go on to become an Academy Award-winning film, nominated for 6 Oscars and winning for Best Adapted Screenplay. But what Ron Stallworth learned in his undercover work was even more disturbing. This is Loki Mulholland, and it's time to get uncomfortable. Today, as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, freedom rider and civil rights activist, Levon Brown. Levon, how's it going?
Good, Loki. How are you doing?
Doing great. We've, Levon, we got a cool one here today. We've got the Black Klansman himself with us, Mr. Stallworth.
How are you?
I'm fine, sir. Thank you both.
Well, we're honored to have you with us. And
I'm honored to be here.
Now, before we get started, we need to lay something out here. I just want to kind of clear the air a little bit because Levon, you were actually chased down by the Klan, and Mr. Stallworth, you were actually an official member of the Klan. So, is this going to be a problem between you two?
Not if he wasn't chasing me.
No, I don't have my lighted cross in my hand, so he's good.
I'm good. All right.
Well, real brief, for those who haven't watched the movie or read your book, can you give us kind of the Cliff Note versions of the story, just in a nutshell?
Well, I answered an ad in the classified section of the local newspaper in Colorado Springs. The ad said Ku Klux Klan for information, and then there was a P.O. box. So I wrote a letter to the P.O. box, pretending to be a fellow white supremacist who wanted to preserve the white race, the purity of the white race. And a week later, I got a phone call from the chapter president in Colorado Springs, who asked me why I wanted to join. So I laid all the racial hatred BS that you hear them spouting on him. And he said, "You're just the kind of guy we're looking for. When can we meet?" And that's when I went, "Oh, shit." And my investigation was officially off and running at that point, and it lasted for about 7.5 months total.
Yeah, so they sight unseen, they recruited you.
Basically, that if they're the superior master race, that shows you just how fallible they are.
So my understanding is that you were actually also the first Black officer to work for the Colorado Springs Police Department.
No, I was the first Black detective.
First Black detective, okay.
Yeah.
Which is a separate unit from the actual police department then?
No, the detective division is part of the police department.
Division, okay, yeah.
But I was the first Black put into the detective division.
Okay. So what was that experience like?
Well, when you're the first Black anything, there's a little pressure on you. You have to perform. You have to be above the fray, so to speak. You cannot afford to have any fall downs on the job, so to speak. You have to be on top of your game, because if there is the slightest fallacy on your part, you are not setting a path for the next person to come along and succeed. So you have to be above board in every way. And if any pressure was on me, that was about it. I knew I was capable of doing the job. I didn't worry about that. It was just a matter of performing once I got in the job.
Did you get the feeling that they were, when you first went in, that they were waiting on you to fail?
No, on the contrary. I had established myself within the department. I had been working in the department for over 4 years at that point, and had established myself with the rank and file. There were 2 people that would have liked to have seen me fail, and that is the lieutenant and the sergeant that I reference in my book as Lieutenant Art and Sergeant Jim. They would have loved to have seen me fail, but all of their desires didn't come to pass.
Okay.
So prior to your investigation of the Klan, your first assignment is to go undercover investigating actually a friend of my mother's. And Levon, I think you knew him as well, but Kwame Torre, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael.
Correct. Correct.
And why did the police send you in to investigate him? What was the concern?
He was given a speech at a local black nightclub. None of the white officers, well, they could have gone, but they would have stood out. And they wanted someone that mixed in with the crowd, basically, and there I was. I was still a uniformed cop at the time, but they knew that I wanted to do undercover work, so they came to me and gave me this assignment. And it was relatively simple. Go undercover into this bar, fit in, and basically monitor the speech he was going to give and see what threat, if any, it posed to the department. And I was to come back and write a report on my opinion of that. And that was the nature of it. But I was also told if you can buy any drugs or anything from anybody and make a case, feel free to do so. They gave me city government funds in order to accomplish that, which I didn't, by the way. But I was concerned about one thing only, and that was whether I could have an alcoholic drink while on duty. So they told me yes. They told me yes, and I did have one drink.
Why do they want you to investigate Kwame Torre? What was the concern? Because I guess you were saying before that there was this aspect of if they said anything that might be detrimental for the police.
Yeah, anybody who's ever seen video footage of him during that time period, he was a very dynamic speaker, very powerful speaker. He could move an audience like nobody's business with his words. And they were concerned that he was going to give this fiery, bombastic speech, which was his signature, and that, quote unquote, the good black citizens of Colorado Springs were going to become inflamed and want to carry out some evil intent. So I was sent in there to monitor his speech and see where he was going, what the audience reaction was, and determine whether or not they, in fact, wanted to act on his words so that the department could chart a path forward in responding.
Did you know whether or not you were the only undercover officer there?
Oh, yeah, I knew that.
You were? Okay.
Yeah, there were no other black undercover cops in Colorado Springs.
So the FBI or anybody wouldn't have been there as well then?
There were no black FBI agents.
Okay.
You have to understand, in that time period, there were 3 black undercover cops in the entire state of Colorado. One was DEA, one was in Denver, and then there was me.
Okay.
So and this is the mid 1970s, right?
When this happened with Stokely, it was right around April of 1975.
Okay. So in this sort of atmosphere, this wasn't necessarily uncommon. I mean, they were police departments all over the country were doing this sort of thing.
Oh yeah, they're still doing it today too, by the way.
Right. So the concern becomes this, creating some sort of black uprising then.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. They were expecting violence on the part of the audience reaction to Stokely's words, and if there was going to be violence, and you got to keep in mind, this was 1975. Mm-hmm. This was barely 5 or 6 years after the major cities in America were set on fire due to the killings of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. And they were concerned that something might happen that would ignite this type of passion again.
Did they have other investigations of other organizations that necessarily, that weren't black?
No, there were no organizational investigations of the far left, and nobody at that time dealt with anything known as the far right. So no, there were no such investigations in place.
Well, so why focus on Stokely?
Because Stokely could ignite a crowd to go out and burn stuff. He had the ability to ignite people's passions and basically prompt them to take action. And they were concerned about that. The department would have been remiss in its job if it hadn't monitored that speech. In And since they had no one available to do it, black, they came to me, who was a uniformed cop at the time, and gave me the opportunity to do an undercover assignment. I had no qualms about going undercover within the black community. At that time, heroin was running rampant within the black community, and there was a lot of drug overdoses taking place. I had no problems going undercover within my own people and bringing these fools to justice. People were dying. And Stokely just happened to be the first assignment that I was given for the opportunity to prove myself.
But Stokely was not into drugs.
We're not talking drugs. We're talking an intelligence investigation of the possibility of violence based on his rhetoric.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Drugs had nothing to do with it.
Right.
But the people that were in the club monitoring Stokely were into drugs. A lot of them were into drugs. That's why they told me if I could make an undercover drug buy, feel free to do so.
So then with the investigation of the Klan, but now you have, but that was on your own accord, because you see this ad. This is not something that the chiefs or whatever, your office commanding officers would have said, hey, we want you to go check out this far right group known as the Klan.
No, I initiated that because I was an intelligence detective at the time, and as an intelligence detective, my job was to monitor any subversive activity within the city that could pose a threat to the city. The Ku Klux Klan is a domestic terrorist organization. When I saw the ad, it was automatic. I made a phone call, not knowing where it was going to go or having any expectation. And when the guy, the Klan chapter president, called and asked, why do you want to join? That's when things went in motion.
But now the Klan at that time was not known as a terrorist organization, was it?
All clans throughout history have been terrorist organizations.
No, that's what you think of them. That's what I think of them. But you're telling me that the police department in your town felt that way?
The police department is concerned about. We were concerned about subversive activity entering our city. The Ku Klux Klan, dating back to its founding, has been a domestic terrorist organization. 1 and 1 equals 2.
I understand that. I agree with you. I'm saying that up until recently, the Klan was not known as a subversive organization on the whole. The FBI, for instance, did not consider it a terrorist organization.
We were a city police department. We didn't give a damn what the FBI thought. The Klan was a domestic terrorist organization. It always has been, always will be, and we responded accordingly.
Okay.
My work has taken me to a lot of places, and I've been fortunate to meet some incredible people. But when I came to Selma and met Joanne Blackman Bland, I knew I was in the presence of greatness. Joanne was 11 years old when she was attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday in 1965. She wasn't old enough to vote, but understood its importance enough to be there. After Selma is an in-depth look at how our right to vote has eroded since the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The fight for the right to vote continues. Get informed. You can find After Selma on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. And this was the first chapter that they opened up in Colorado Springs?
Let me put it this way. From the time I lived in Colorado Springs, which was 1972, this was the first time any activity of the Klan was known. What went on before my arrival in the city, I couldn't say.
Oh, okay. So what did you learn about the Klan's recruiting practices?
Well, that newspaper ad was the recruiting practice.
And then just a phone call and, hey, you're in.
Well, they were putting ads in the local papers. They were doing it in Denver, too. Putting ads in the classified section of the Denver newspaper, Ku Klux Klan for information, and then they'd give the P.O. box or whatever of the local Klan chapter in the Denver area. So this was a tactic of theirs at that time.
And how successful were they at it in that region?
Well, they got a crazy black guy to attempt to join. I couldn't tell you what the numbers were. wasn't interested in all that. All I was concerned about was that they extended the invitation to take it further, and I ran with it.
Now, running with it, obviously you couldn't show up in person. Clearly that wasn't, this is,
Why not?
For a Klan meeting?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, I would have loved to see that.
No, I couldn't. I couldn't go to a meeting, and that's when I had to put a plan of action, move a plan of action forward. And my plan was simply to get a white officer who I knew, an undercover cop who worked narcotics. He was about my height, my weight. And when I had the phone call with the Klan chapter president, he asked me what I looked like for our meeting. And I described this undercover white officer and told him how he would be dressed. I knew how he generally came to work. And I told him how he'd be dressed, and that's how he would be able to recognize Ron Stallworth. And that's what we did.
Dang. You were born in Chicago, you moved to El Paso, and then to Colorado Springs.
I moved to El Paso when I was 4 years old,
Yeah.
1957. And I moved to Colorado Springs in 1972 when I was 19. I graduated from high school in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
A year later, my family moved to Colorado Springs. I joined the police department at the age of 19 as what was called a police cadet. It was a civilian support job. We wore uniforms. We were basically officers in training, but we did civilian support jobs around the department, and we were sent to the police academy during that time period. And when you turned 21, which was the legal age for carrying a weapon, when you turned 21, you were then put on your field training program. That lasted anywhere from 4 to 6 months, and you were a full-fledged officer at that point.
How long were you an officer before you became a detective?
I was a uniformed officer for 1 year and 2 months. And when I became a detective in August of 1975, I was the youngest detective in the history of the Colorado Springs Police Department up to that time, and I believe it still holds.
Wow.
So did you have to actually, portray yourself as a white person on the phone? Obviously, there's the typical racial rhetoric that the Klan wanted to hear. But was there any
No, that's a common misconception from the publicity of that movie. Mm-hmm. People think that I got on the phone and pretended to sound white. My only question to that is, how do you sound white? Mm-hmm. Okay. What distinguishes a white voice from a black voice? I know there are some people you can listen to them and say, oh, he's got to be black. Just as there are some Southerners you can hear and you can tell by their voice that they're from the South by their accent. But not everybody from the South has an accent. Mm-hmm. Not every black man sounds like a, quote, black man, and not every white person sounds white, whatever the hell that means. Mm-hmm. So those people who like to say that I was pretending to be white, the only thing I was pretending was that I was one of them, a fellow white supremacist. I didn't disguise my voice. You can't do that unless you are a trained mimic. You don't go around doing that when you're undercover. So I was just being Ron Stallworth, pretending to be a white supremacist on the phone.
So how did you, the other investigator then, was there enough similarity in your voices that when he showed up, they just passed right off? Or it's like, oh, that's just the phone, and phones sound different anyways.
If they are the so-called superior master race, they're failing miserably at it, because if you heard the real, the white officer posing as me, his voice was totally different than mine. They should have known from the very beginning they were dealing with two different people on the phone. But they were not, as I put in my book, the brightest light bulbs in the socket. And as a result, we were able to con them again for about 7.5 months.
And during this, you guys discover who, some of the recruiting efforts were trickling into the military.
Yeah, I got wind of the fact that I was contacted by some people associated with the Army base, Fort Carson, Colorado, and an airman from the local Air Force base. And over time, I established the fact that at the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, which is responsible for protecting North American airspace, a joint venture with Canada, I found out that there were a couple of Klansmen whose assignment, they had top security clearance at NORAD, and their job was to monitor the console, which monitored air traffic in North America. And when I brought that to NORAD's attention, it led to a meeting with the deputy commander of NORAD, who was a full bird colonel in the Army. And he in turn contacted the Pentagon. The Pentagon, he spoke to some general, I do not know who, spoke to some general and told the general that I had identified Klansmen stationed at NORAD. And that general, whoever he was, gave the order that these two people were to be dismissed from their top security assignment and relocated, quote unquote, to the North Pole. That's what I was told. And then I asked the question, do we have a base at the North Pole? And the response I got was, we have one very close to it, and that's all they would say. So if there is a base, I assume it's considered secret or top secret. But by 5 p.m. that day, those two guys were removed from their assignment and were under transport to, quote unquote, the North Pole.
So here we have these, these clans, like you said, top secret clearance and all these sort of things. I mean, in NORAD, what does that say about having the military infiltrated by the Klan?
I was surprised. Quite frankly, the military seemed surprised by it too. But after my investigation ended and I did more checking, I found out that there was similar activity at other bases around the country. Marine base in Camp Pendleton in California was having Klan activity. A U.S. naval ship was having Klan activity on its deck. This was a fairly common practice within the U.S. military at that time. No investigations were taking place, but I uncovered it in Colorado Springs.
Now, was the Klan the activity that was taking place, was it being done in secret, or because they were not bothered, people just kind of?
It was being done secret in the sense that they weren't going around openly advertising themselves, but neither were they hiding. They like to brag amongst their little group. They claim to have burned crosses. I had no record of any crosses being burned during the course of my investigation. In fact, they didn't burn any during my investigation. But they were making all kinds of claims that they were burning crosses and that they were terrorizing blacks in neighborhoods and whatnot by burning crosses on their lawn. We had no proof of that. They were very open about their activities. They just thought that they were talking to a fellow white supremacist in me and didn't fear talking to me about it. So
with jumping back to the military aspect of things, I mean, the Klan has a history of being, in the South in particular, oftentimes the police force was also Klan's members. So this doesn't seem like a big leap to have the parts of the military be involved in the Klan as well.
No, it really isn't a big leap. You got to understand, the Ku Klux Klan represents a microcosm of the local community. You got good people in the community, you got bad people. The Klan is just a microcosm of that, except everybody in the Klan can be considered a bad person. So the fact that there may have been Klan members associated with the military was not surprising by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that they got discovered.
Yeah.
But there are good and bad. They're good in the community. They're bad in the community. The Klan is a microcosm of that.
Well, I think also just in light of, in particular, where the military is now wanting to remove Confederate emblems altogether from the military, rename some of the forts, bases and stuff that were named after, Confederate generals and things. It almost feels like as if this was kind of I'm just thinking about this. It's just that it created an atmosphere that would foster that sort of attitude, or at least allow it to be accepted. You know,
That's very true. And before we start worrying about changing the names of Confederate bases named after the members of the Confederacy, we need to get rid of that idiot sitting in the White House, because he is the one that's fueling a lot of this today. And it's not surprising that we have a rise in white supremacist activity. He's a mouthpiece for them.
mm-hmm.
I refer to him as the unofficial leader of the white supremacy movement in America today. So if we want to remove statues, stone ghosts, if you will, in the South, which is the title of an MSNBC special, if we want to remove those stone ghosts, then we need to remove that idiot sitting in Barack Obama's old chair.
Mm. The fact that the people like David Duke are endorsing him, I mean, and he doesn't actually speak out against that.
He claims he does. He'll give lip service to that, but it's lip service with a wink and a nod and a Heil Hitler salute, if you will. David Duke, 41 years ago, or 42 years ago, David Duke was preaching to me on the phone what Donald Trump is preaching to America and putting into action. When Donald Trump ran for office in 2015, the words that were coming out of his mouth were not surprising to me, like a lot of people in this country were shocked that he would say some of the things that he did. It didn't shock me because I had heard it 40 years earlier. David Duke tried to achieve what Trump accomplished 3.5 years ago. Trump is just a better con man than David Duke ever was, and that's what happened in 2016. America got conned royally, and we're still living with the effects of his con job.
It's a little more than that to me, because it's, I mean, I understand, and I hear the anger. I guess what I, at the same time that Trump was ascending, I was reading a lot of books about the Nazis, and a lot of what Trump does, I guess a lot of what the Klan does as well, is a lot like what the Nazis did with the press, with the demonstrations, with the just how he deals with people. He really doesn't care about human beings. His activity shows that he doesn't care even about the people that support him. Well, that's what the Nazis did. That's how they won. And Trump's, quite frankly, he scares me because the people surrounding him are smart enough to know what to do, whereas he's not. He's the figurehead. But there are a lot of people in his government that are no different than what the Nazis were.
Trump doesn't scare me. I think he's a joke. I think he's a clown. And I think there's enough people in this country that are starting to recognize that he's a joke and a clown. People have understood it from the very beginning. Sad to say, Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina senator, identified Trump as a clown. But Lindsey chose to drink the Kool-Aid in order to keep himself elected. And he's overlooked all that, just as a whole lot of Republicans have overlooked the dirt that Trump is doing. But I don't fear him. I'm not scared of him. I simply recognize him for what he is. He's not a surprise to me, and he shouldn't be to anyone else in this country. He shouldn't have been in 2016. Trump is a bona fide racial bigot, white supremacist.
I agree with
you. He just clouds it over with all of his con job rhetoric. And there's enough fools out there, a lot of them my police colleagues, I might add, as well as members of the military. There's a lot of fools out there that buy into his con job. But he's not fooling anybody.
Yeah. I think what concerns me is when you're saying that the things that we are hearing from him are the same things you heard from David Duke, and yet we have people, like you said, fellow officers, people in the military. Clearly, a lot of people still support this guy. What is it that they're really truly supporting at this point?
I have a friend that I worked with in the Salt Lake City area. He's still a police officer there. And he put a post out on Facebook recently that said he asked a fellow officer, white officer, what was it about Trump that made you like him? And the officer's response was, my 401k is doing pretty good because of Trump. That's his reason. 401k. He's not concerned about anything else except what his 401k says. He's forgetting totally about Trump's subversion of the rule of law. All he's concerned about is what that 401k is printing out. That's a sad testament to our times. That you don't concern yourself with any other aspect of American society except how much money your 401k is making. It's making money because of the economy that Barack Obama left, not anything Trump has done. Trump's appeal comes from the white grievance that he's able to generate. White people feel like they've been given a bad shake. Where they come up with that, I have no idea. But they feel aggrieved because more people are paying attention to the minority issues in this country as opposed to whether or not whites have a valid argument. Whites have a valid argument, but don't tell me as a white person that your grievance is greater than the history of grievances that me as a black person, my Latina Hispanic wife and her ancestors have suffered. You have no grievance compared to what we have gone through. And yet whites feel that their grievance with America is so much greater and needs to be actualized. And Trump is their vessel, their vehicle towards that.
Because just like others have done before him, he points to somebody else, and the somebody else he points to is anything that is black or brown or red or green or whatever. Anybody that is not white. And that's why he doesn't attack racists, he doesn't attack, because those are his people. But he doesn't, what's amazing is he really doesn't care about them either.
In my other life, I'm a filmmaker, and one of my more fascinating films I created is the award-winning film titled Black, White, and Us. It's about viewing racism through the lens of transracial adoptions in Utah. Utah? Yeah, Utah. It just so happens to be the transracial adoption capital of the world. So what happens when white families who didn't believe racism existed anymore adopts a black child? Find it on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection.
Trump concerns himself with Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. He could care less about America.
That's it.
He's in this to gain what he can from the office of the presidency, and however long he's in that office, he's going to milk it for what he can, for what it can do to boost his financial empire. And what angers me is when my police colleagues around the country swear by Trump, completely ignoring the abuse of the rule of law that he has brought into place. And as I've told several of them, you have worked con artists in your career. You know a con man when you hear it. And yet you all are ignoring the fact that this guy is a classic con man, except he's doing it on a very, very large scale.
Right.
How can you do that? How can you not say something and not want to take action against that? And they all come back to the same thing, is that Trump isn't doing anything wrong, that it's the blacks, it's the Hispanics, it's the migrants, the Muslims. We have to get them all out of the country and get back to America first. America first simply means a return to white dominance in this country, where blacks are submissive, where we have to look the other way, walk with our head down, be polite, and never ever look like we want to foment dissension in this country. That time will never come to pass ever again. We won't allow it. There'll be another civil war before it comes to that.
Well, it's interesting. But these are police officers. These are people who are in control, and they're having these conversations.
Yes, it is, and that's what's frustrating. It is interesting. It's frustrating, and quite frankly, it angers me. My colleagues are smarter than that, but there are some dumb shit cops in this country, and I have worked with some of them, and those that fall into that category are diehard Trump supporters.
But keep in mind that to them, they opened up the armory for them. So you have cops in small towns of 50,000 people or 25,000 people riding around in armored vehicles, and they're dressed to kill, and he gives them toys, and they fall for that. Money and toys, and that's what they fall for, because that's what he gives them. And every time there's an argument about the demonstrations or about black people or about anything, all he does is gives more toys and more guns and more
Trump
uniforms.
didn't give them toys. Trump didn't give them toys. No. It started with George Bush.
That's right. He did.
It started with George Bush, and Obama cut the program off.
And Trump
has resurrected it.
Right.
And as a former cop, when I was working for the department, quite frankly, I was all for those toys.
Right.
I now see that it was a mistake, but when you see what's happening on the streets, we were dealing with gangs during my time in Utah. When you see what the gang members had to work with versus what we as cops had to do, hell yeah, I wanted those toys. But police officers, police departments have abused those toys, and that's what needs to be brought in check. But if you open the armory to police officers, hell yeah, they're going to take whatever they can get out of that armory. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they?
No. But that's why they support Trump.
No, that's not the only reason. Like I said, a lot of them feel like they're making more money towards retirement because of their 401k.
Right.
They feel like Trump is the second coming of Christ, which is another thing. What the hell is wrong with these dumbass evangelicals that they buy into the fact that Trump's a Christian? They're some of the stupidest people in the world, and I'll go on record and say I'll walk into a church and say that. There's no excuse for people who allegedly believe in God and are God-fearing to think this guy's the second coming of Christ.
That's not what they're buying. What they're buying is he puts the judges in place that they want. He supports their issues. He doesn't get in their way. That's what they support, not Trump.
Yes, they are supporting that, but they're doing it under the guise of being Christians, and that Trump is supporting their Christian evangelical movement.
That
Bullshit.
Is true.
He's not supporting any such thing.
I agree.
Trump has conned them arguably the most, but they buy into it. Again, some of them think he's the second coming of Christ. What Christ do they believe in? What historical Christ are they talking about that this man can remotely be compared to Christ?
Right.
It makes no damn sense.
One of the things when coming back to this whole thing of the Klan, and you had mentioned something about we're never going to go back to those days, and there's going to be another civil war. There's going to be another civil war. Was it in South Carolina or North Carolina where 3 officers were there? Like you said, there's some pretty dumb people out there, and some of them happen to be cops. But they left their body cameras on, and it captured a recording of them talking about how, they can't wait to go out and kill some black people and kill this judge and so forth.
I heard about that.
These things get exposed. I mean, imagine what's not getting captured. And again, you're coming back to this idea that, they support an individual like Trump, who, as you described, is everything he is saying and stuff today is what you heard from David Duke 40 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So,
and I go back in terms of these officers that you mentioned, which again, they're stupid, but I go back to the fact that they represent a microcosm of their community. Police departments should be a microcosm of the community that they represent. So the fact that you have these 3 officers saying the stupid things that they did is not surprising. They're part of the community in which they serve.
You should have officers that come from the community, but they need to serve and represent everybody, not just, let's make sure we kill off the blacks and preserve whites. I mean,
but they're a microcosm of the community, and in the community they serve, there are people that actually think that way, and they probably are 3 of the ones who grew up thinking that way. So they're merely reflecting what they were taught in their upbringing. Again, They're a microcosm of the community. It's not a surprise. Nobody should be surprised that we have cops talking that way. They shouldn't, but they do. They do.
So when does that talk become action? Have we seen that in respects to like a George Floyd and such?
I've never seen it, but that doesn't mean it can't one day happen. George Floyd is a classic example of out of control cops. There's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. But heaven help us if it ever does get out of control and they put it into action full blown. There are more, the bad cops that we're talking about are probably 1% of a police department. Okay. So you take Salt Lake City, the largest municipal police department in Utah. Maybe, I don't know how many officers they have now, but probably 1% probably hit that metric. And of the ones that hit that metric, there's probably 0.5% or 1% of that are actually the real far extreme, either left or right. They're the far extreme that probably want to go out and take that type of action. So I guess if I had any good news, it's the fact that it's not widespread. Anybody that says it is, I'll call him a damn liar. That's just not true.
But what is widespread is the silence that the other policemen have.
Oh, I agree with you 100% on that. We have a blue wall of silence. Cops are afraid to snitch on other cops. But I will again point out that is a microcosm of the society at large. People within the community don't like snitching on others within the community. I became a detective because no blacks in the community wanted to snitch on fellow blacks who were selling heroin, even though it was running rampant at the time. You know, so I was recruited to be a narc so I could penetrate that community and bring these fools in. I had no problems doing that, but nobody wanted to snitch on their fellow drug dealers. Okay, so again, I point out it's a microcosm of the society in which the cops serve.
So in just a couple quick things I thought was kind of interesting is you were actually when did David Duke actually come to Colorado Springs?
Yeah, I was his bodyguard.
And you were his bodyguard?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, obviously you weren't there in person as his bodyguard, but.
No, I stood right beside him and was his bodyguard. I introduced myself to him. You saw it in the movie. That scene actually happened.
Oh, really?
It happened pretty close to what was depicted in the movie. I introduced myself to David Duke that morning when he came into town for a publicity blitz. I got notified by my chief of police that there were death threats against David Duke, and the chief said, I don't want anything to happen to this man while he's in my city. I am going to assign a security detail to him. You're it. We have no one else available. I argued as best I could not to do this. The chief said, I don't want anything happening to him in my city. You're it. So I went and met David Duke. I introduced myself without giving him a last name. I simply said, I am a detective with the Colorado Springs Police Department, and we have death threats against you. And the chief is assigning me to be your security because he doesn't want anything happening to you while in his city. I said, I don't believe in your philosophy or political ideology, but I am a professional. I will do the best to my ability to see that you leave this town alive. And then I shook hands with him. He gave me the Klan handshake. And
well, you were already a member at that point, right? So
what?
You were already a member at that point, right?
I was carrying a Klan membership card in my wallet as I was talking to him, signed by him. But I shook hands with him, and from that moment on, I shadowed him for the next roughly 6 hours before he eventually left town.
No, and eventually he did find out that, you know, a black man made a fool out of him when the
he found out in January of 2006, when the story of what I had done first hit the wires nationally. A Miami Herald reporter, black, Leonard Sims, contacted him He contacted me to ask me if the story was true. I said, absolutely. He then contacted David Duke and asked him if the story was true. David said, no, he's lying. And I told Sims, I said, ask him if I'm lying, why am I carrying a membership card signed by him, and why I have a certificate of membership also signed by him hanging on my wall at my office. And when he pointed that out to Duke, Duke said, well, we didn't do anything illegal, so what's the big deal? And he was right. They had done nothing illegal, but they had carried guns illegally, which I knew of. And if I had wanted to arrest them for misdemeanor carrying of concealed weapons, I could have done so at any time. We were looking for something bigger than a misdemeanor offense, and we ignored it. Right. So he was breaking the law. He and his people were breaking the law, but we chose to ignore it in hopes of getting a felony where we could send all of them to prison for a lengthy time. Unfortunately, that didn't come to pass.
And you mentioned prison as well, is that the Klan does actively recruit in prisons as well, not just the military.
I paid a visit at that time to the Colorado State Penitentiary to talk to the lieutenant in the intelligence division about their recruitment efforts in prison at that time. It's one of the major recruiting areas that they have. You have these people that are confined, they're locked up. Once you get in prison, if you're white, you immediately become on the a member of the white supremacist side, and it's fertile recruitment grounds for the Klan and other white nationalist groups.
Protection.
For them, their strength in numbers, they protect, they band together just like the blacks do, just like the Hispanics do. It's very tribal in a prison environment.
Do they stay members when they come out, do you think?
Yes. Yes, they get indoctrinated. If they weren't indoctrinated before, they become indoctrinated in prison. They become hardcore, and by the time they get out, it's a lifestyle.
Wow.
An Ordinary Hero was my first award-winning documentary. It's about the life of my mother, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, and her participation in the civil rights movement. For most of us, our mothers are heroes because they're mothers, and mom is just mom. But when your mother's a civil rights icon, and yet you never really knew it, things change. Go check out An Ordinary Hero and find out how choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy helped change the world. You can find it on Amazon Prime, or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection.
In one of the interviews, you said that David Duke was actually a very nice guy in person, but
he is.
And a pleasant, and I'm quoting here, a pleasant conversationalist.
He is.
But when the conversation turns to race, there's this Jekyll and Hyde thing that actually happens with him.
Yeah. If you have a daughter and your daughter brought home David Duke and you knew nothing about him, you would like him. You would like him. You'd find common ground in terms of talking to him and everything else. It's when the conversation turns to race. Dr. Jekyll becomes Mr. Hyde and the monster in him is unleashed. That's the scary thing about David Duke. He's very disarming. He's very disarming. You can sit up there and talk to this man one-on-one and have a beer with him, and I guarantee you will find common ground with him. You would think nothing of him other than he's a very nice, he was a very nice looking guy in his younger days. He was the type of guy that you would want your daughter to date until he opens his mouth and the subject of race comes up. And that's when you really find out the truth about it.
Wow.
What does that say in general about these Klansmen? I mean, it's these wolves in sheep's clothing, I guess, in a sense.
Well, it says that they have an aspect about them that is disarming, and unless you're on your game, you can fall for it. It also says that you better hope you have a smart daughter and she's not a fool, because she would fall for his crap too. That's the danger to David Duke or any charismatic extremist. That was the danger of Stokely Carmichael. Stokely was a very attractive man. In fact, in my book, I described my meeting with him after he gave his speech. He was standing in a receiving line, and as people walked by, they were shaking his hand, and they were allowed to ask him a question or two. And as I came by, he grabbed my hand, and I said, tell me something, brother. Do you honestly think there's going to be a war between the races, the white and the black race? He pulled me in real close. And as he pulled me in real close to him, he whispered conspiratorially, and he had the brightest white teeth I've ever seen on anyone. And he had what I have described as cocoa-colored skin, flawless skin. He was a beautiful man. But he pulled me in real close, and he said, brother, get yourself ready, prepare yourself, because there's going to be a war. And we're going to have to kill Whitey. Just as a matter of fact, we're going to have to kill Whitey. Prepare yourself, because we're going to have to kill Whitey. Then he pushed me back very gently, pumped my hand a couple of times and said, I'll see you later, brother. And I said, same to you, and walked off. That was my close encounter with Black history. And I remember it to this day. The appearance of Stokely. He was very disarming in his physical appearance, but put him in front of a microphone, in front of a rabid audience, and Stokely could preach like no one's business, and he could incite you to want to do things you might not have thought of.
To me, there seems like there's some, some parallels that you're probably drawing between David Duke and Stokely Carmichael.
They both were, by the nature of their times, extremists. One on the right, one on the left. And what I'm saying is when you get an extremist person, there's not much difference in them, other than, in this case, skin color. But Stokely had his topic that he was preaching. David Duke had his. And they were both on extreme ends of the spectrum. Now, I happen to share a lot of what Stokely was saying. In the movie, it's shown during his talk, you see John David Washington as me starting to identify with some of the things Stokely was saying, to the point where he raised his fist and gave the Black Power salute and said, right on. That actually happened in real life with me. I found myself agreeing with a lot of what Stokely was saying. First of all, I may have been a cop. I may have been operating in an undercover capacity that night. But before I ever became a police officer, before I ever assumed that undercover role, I was a Black man in America.
Right.
And I when I took my badge off at night and took my gun off at night, I was still a Black man in America. So what Stokely was preaching that night resonated with me very strongly. And that's one thing we tend to forget when we talk about police officers, especially Black police officers. They are Black first, but they happen to have a job to do. And sometimes in that job, they have to compromise their Blackness in order to enforce the law, and anyone that gets caught up in it. If you're not breaking the law, you don't have to worry.
Well, in perpetrating as a white person who's now a member of the Klan, I mean, talk about, giving up your Blackness. I mean, how hard was it?
I never gave up my Blackness.
All right.
I just conned them into believing that.
Okay, yeah. Right. But I mean, the compromise you had to make in respects of having to listen to this, not that you necessarily hadn't heard it before outside of your job, but having to also espouse it in a sense, not that you believed it, but they wanted to hear the things to make sure that you were one of them.
Oh, that was one of the funny parts about the whole investigation. That was the fun part about it, is I would say the things that they wanted to hear, criticizing the Black community and Black leaders. I would say all that crap. And my sergeant, in fact, I described it in my book, it was like a Saturday Night Live skit. My sergeant would be sitting in his office, feet on his desk, listening to me, pretending to be a white supremacist, spouting off hateful, vitriolic references to the Black community and all the Black leaders and so forth. He'd be listening to this, and I'd be sitting there on my desk saying all this crap with a smile on my face, and he'd be cracking up at me. At one point, he'd be laughing so hard that he fell out of his chair on one knee, because I'm pretending to be a white supremacist and these idiots on the phone are buying into my pretense. At another point, it got so heated that he ran out of the office cracking up laughing, because he couldn't take it anymore. And when he walked back in, I'm still spouting off about being a white supremacist, using their language. He ran back out of the office to recover himself. So it was like a Saturday Night Live skit, but that's what I had to do in order to be convincing. I had to use what I refer to as the words, the language of hate to these guys on the phone so that they would recognize me as being one of them, sympathetic to their cause. Right. And it worked. As I said, they weren't the brightest light bulbs in the socket.
Did any of that ever eat at you?
No. Undercover work, I used to say this when I was with Spike Lee and John David and all the actors. What I was doing is in an undercover capacity was no different than what they were doing on film, except I was working a real life situation that could have gone sour at any moment. Guns could have come out at any moment. Tension was high a couple of times, but it never erupted into any real bad way. The only thing that was different from what I was doing than what they were doing, making a movie, is that I didn't have a Spike Lee to yell cut and let's move on to the next scene. I had to carry that scene through to the next one and continue the ruse that I was pulling off. And that's the fun of undercover work. You're acting, plain and simple.
For you, what's the real lesson out of Black Klansman? What's the takeaway that we should really get out of this?
The real lesson is there are evil forces out there that want to reverse time. And again, go back to a time when people of color were subservient to whites in general. We are living in that time right now. And the biggest threat that we have right now is that the main man that's pushing all this is the one that's at the head of government. And we can't sleep on that. We have to be wary of these forces around us, and don't sleep on it, because if you do, they'll creep up and they will be the ones to overcome.
I do have a question. When you talked about maybe the 1% or 2% of policemen that are racist or that are performing in a certain way, are part of their community, do we have to change the community in order to change them?
No. Police officers need to live up to the oath that they took. We all know what that oath is. It was to uphold the Constitution, the laws of the Constitution, both state and federal, and simply live up to the integrity that is inherent within all of us, and be honest in our exercising of the law when we deal with citizens, no matter who those citizens are. When you get an out of control officer who violates his oath and abuses his constitutional authority, you have somebody that's lost his way. And that's a dangerous person, because we're the only profession where they give us permission to kill. So we need to be willing to enforce the law fairly. We need to recognize the integrity of our oath, of our badge, our uniform. We need to respect the people who we are we have pledged to serve and protect. And we need to be willing to drop the blue wall of silence when it does go into effect, and to identify the bad apples and kick them out of the barrel.
Want a great way to help a worthy organization and educate children about the civil rights movement? Visit our foundation, the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation, at thejtmfoundation.org. That's thejtmfoundation.org. We are a 501c3 established to help end racism through education. A $5 monthly recurring donation will provide curriculum for 30 students. As my mother used to say, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing is not an option. If you have wanted to help in this cause, but didn't know how, now you can. The Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation at thejtmfoundation.org.
So now, what can we as citizens do in support of that? And what is our role when working with with the police departments and so forth as citizens? I mean, without the rhetoric of well, I pay taxes and I pay your income and that sort of nonsense. That doesn't get anyone anywhere.
Well, the first thing you have to do is recognize that not all cops are bad. I was called a bad cop back in my day because for no other reason than I was a black man wearing a uniform and a badge. Right. And I had fellow blacks in the community of Colorado Springs who called me a pig on sight for no other reason than I was a cop. I even tried to recruit blacks to join the department. And I would give them the spiel about why this is a good profession to start a career in and the benefits after the end of 20 years, the benefits that you have for your life and so forth. And the response I got was always the same. Man, I don't want to be no pig. And I'd ask them, what are you doing right now with your life? Nothing. I get high, come and go as I please and get high when I please. I said, so you're going to get high your whole life? When are you going to settle down and do something constructive with your life? I said, man, I couldn't become a pig. I can't snitch on my own people. I wouldn't do that. And yet they were looking for jobs. I have no sympathy for anyone like that. They're just stupid. Be they black, be they white, whatever. They're just stupid. There's no excuse for that. And ignorance breeds more ignorance, and these were ignorant fools. So stop recognizing or stop attempting to label all cops as bad. Not all cops are bad. If you're one of these people that goes around saying all cops are bad, for a black man, that's like all whites saying all blacks are niggers. Right. It ain't true. It ain't true. Don't do it. Recognize the bad when you see it, but recognize there's also some good out there and acknowledge that when you come across it. And when you do find the bad, do everything you could to get that bad out. They don't deserve to carry a badge and a gun. And they definitely don't need to desecrate that uniform.
But when you have that blue wall of silence, that thin blue line, whatever the term they use is, there's that sort of that mentality of the us versus them, the cops against the community, at least that appearance. And so you go and talk to to the chief of police and so forth, saying, hey, we got the problem with these particular officers here, and they're like, well, yeah, we'll take care of that on our own, and this sort of stuff. Nothing ever happens. And so it's like, well, wait a second, you're here to serve the community, and you're not responding to the needs of the community in that respect. So
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. We don't like it when civilians, who I don't care if they are citizens of the community that we serve, we don't like it when civilians come in and are very critical of us and the job that we do. One reason we don't like that is because unless you've been a cop, you can't imagine what we have to go through. Now, it may sound like I'm making an excuse for them, and to a certain extent I am. But I'm trying to put you in the mindset of what cops think, okay? We have to deal with certain realities by being cops, certain realities of the street, and unless you have experienced that from our perspective, you don't really know what's going on. And to suddenly rain criticism on us, we tend to find offensive. And I've always said, before you criticize me, come work with me. Come spend a night with me. Come spend a month with me or whatever, and see the things that I see what I have to deal with on a regular basis. See the domestic violence that I have to respond to and have to keep a husband and his wife or a boyfriend and girlfriend separated in order to find a common ground so that they can continue to peacefully coexist and not kill each other. See what we go through in that before you pass judgment on me. So we don't like being criticized. We definitely don't like it when civilians are the ones passing judgment on us from the standpoint of a citizens review board. There's some cities in this country where you have citizen review boards that actually level the punishment when the cop is found in violation. We feel like the average citizen can't truly understand us because they haven't been in our shoes.
So what do we do then?
Right.
In other words, like I know that all of my friends who are black and have talked to their sons or their daughters about being pulled over by a police officer. I don't know which one I'm going to get. Now, I've been lucky because most of the time when I get pulled over, it's by a cop that I can respect and I can talk to. But I know that my daughter has been pulled over by a cop that has no business on anybody's police force. So if I can't tell the captain or I can't tell the whoever it is, the sergeant, who do I talk to? How do I stop that?
Well, you should be able to talk to the captain or the sergeant or whoever it may be. And if they are doing their job, they will give you the sympathetic ear. I might add, I may have been a cop, but I was dealt with in the same manner as you as a black man and any other black man out there.
I believe that.
It's not unusual. We all have that shared experience of being wrongfully approached by a rogue police officer. And I know, even though I was a badge carrying, gun carrying member of that community, it was still very uncomfortable for me to have to put up with it. Right. But it's like I've told, I used to have the talk with my two sons, and I told them back when they weren't acting stupid and were listening to me, I told them, when you're out there and you're approached by a cop, you do what that cop says. Right. You bite your tongue, because out in the street is not the time to be getting in his face and challenging him. He has the upper hand, and you don't know whether you got somebody that's out of control or whether he's going to do the right thing. So basically, shut your mouth, deal with what he's dishing out, and come back on him later when you have the upper hand. Yeah. Okay. But for so many kids who get caught up in a trick bag, it's because they don't know when to shut up and wait until the time is right for them to unleash their anger on that out of control cop. In the street, when he is approaching you from an official standpoint, is not the time to do it.
It's the wrong time to be right. It's like you said, save yourself for the battle. But at the same voice, you also said that cops don't like to be, the police departments don't like to be criticized by the citizens. And so we're not talking about just standard stuff. We're talking about, like you said, these few bad apples. But now you can't go to the police force and say, hey, look, we're having some serious issues with this particular officer who routinely is doing this stuff. And you're seeing that the police department is really actually doing nothing about it because of that culture you talked about of not wanting to be a snitch, and that the perception becomes that the police take care of themselves. But we're not, there's oftentimes you're not seeing that take place. So there seems to be this sort of logjam and this disconnect of how to hold police officers accountable.
I also said that you should go and talk to somebody, and if that person is doing their job and doing it right, they will have an open mind and listen to your complaint, and they will act appropriately on it.
Right, that's an if. That's an if, though.
Life is an if.
Well, sure. But so how do we as a society work to bridge that gap so that when those ifs come up, that there's a way to work through that so that the police don't feel the community is being confrontational, the community doesn't think that the police is protecting themselves, because that's kind of where we're sitting.
The first thing you've got to do is be willing to step forward with your complaint. If you're one of these that's going to say, well, nothing's going to happen because they stick together, I'm sorry, but shame on you. Shame on you. You should be willing to step forward and voice your complaint and take it where you have to take it, push it to where you have to push it in order to get resolution. If you're not going to do that, then don't complain. Don't complain. You deserve to be treated like the fool that you are. And that may sound harsh, but that's how I feel, and I've always felt that way. Unless you are willing, and I'll use the term, or unless you are willing to snitch this bad cop off, then how is anything ever going to come to light? Unless you are a member of the police department and you're willing to, quote unquote, drop the blue wall of silence and tell your superiors what this fellow officer is doing that you know to be a violation, how can you expect to have a good, clean profession to continue to coexist in?
So whose job is that to make sure that they're having this? I mean, because to drop that blue wall of silence for the police department to, like as you were saying, uphold their the oath they take and so forth, is because what's the expression about the only thing a good cop hates more is a bad cop type of thing, 'Cause bad cops make good cops look bad.
That's very true.
And so, but there's that wall of silence. So how do we move beyond that so that the cops have a space where they feel that they can actually report, that
Let me remember what I said
upholding that
about
oath and that constitution and such.
Remember what I said about the police department being a microcosm of the community they serve?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was always frustrating to me and other officers back in the day, and still exists, is when we have evidence of a crime. We know what the crime is. We know who did it, but the victim is not willing to step forward because they don't want to be a snitch. So how do you expect me to solve your crime, whatever the crime is? How do you expect me to solve it when you're not going to come forward and point out the person that did it so that I can take the appropriate action, give you some vindication?
Mm-hmm.
And when they tell me, well, that's your job, you figure it out, I'll be honest with you. My answer was always, excuse the language, but fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't willing to step forward and take the appropriate action in order for me to solve your crime, then I have no sympathy for you. I will not feel shame because you refuse to do the right thing to help me in my cause. And if you say, throw it back in my face, well, that's your job, you figure it out. I'm telling you the first step towards figuring it out, and you're saying basically F you to me.
Right.
That works both ways.
Mm-hmm.
That works both ways. The police are wrong in a lot of instances. They're not totally wrong in some instances.
Right.
The community is not totally wrong in a lot of instances either. We have to learn to work together. So if you're going to criticize the cops for doing wrong, be willing to accept the fact that there are some people in the community that are equally as guilty from their perspective. And until they find a common ground to work through, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
I will be the first to condemn members of my profession when they're wrong and when they deserve to be wrong, and I tend to do so. If you monitor my Facebook posts, I call them out all the time. But at the same time, when I know them to be right in a certain situation, I will defend them to the death until you give me proof otherwise. And when you give me video proof, like in the George Floyd case, I had no hesitation about calling that officer out for what he was, a murderer, okay? And that's as it should be, and it works both ways. Works both ways.
It's a complex issue. I mean, in the end of the day, what we're looking at is we're all people, and like you said, they're coming from, police officers come from a community, and we kind of ignore the fact that police officers aren't superhuman robots or something. They're actually just like the rest of us that have to deal with extra levels of stress and everything else because of their profession.
Very true.
But bringing in together that working together from a community standpoint and from a police department standpoint to affect that change. I mean, I'm glad we were able to have part of that conversation. I mean, it wasn't the point of the conversation, but but that's all right. That's all right. That's where these things kind of go a little bit. But yeah, you have a fascinating background because of the work that you had to do and diving into the heart of the Klan. And having to go up against the hate that they embody.
What people don't realize is that I was having fun during that entire investigation. It was fun. Not many people get a chance to go nose to nose, face to face with a white supremacist. Not many blacks get to go nose to nose, face to face with a white supremacist group, and especially the leader of that group, and make a complete and total ass out of it. And essentially that's what I did. I had a lot of fun, and 41 years later, 42 years later, I'm still laughing at it.
Any regrets from that time in regards of, I wish I could have in respects to what was going on with the Klan?
Yeah, I regret the fact that we couldn't get them in a felony complaint to where we could have put some of those people away for anywhere from 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I regret that very much. But outside of that, no, we did the job to the best of our ability, and we accomplished more than we imagined when we started that investigation. Gotta remember, there was no plan. This happened as a fluke, and we took it as far as we could, and that was a lot of fun.
Mm.
That was a lot of fun.
Like you said, the good thing is that they aren't that smart. I mean, the bad thing is they're pretty dangerous, and that's a lethal cocktail, unfortunately, in a lot of situations.
Very true, very true. But that's the reality of white supremacists, and that's the reality of extremists, no matter what stripe they may be a part of.
Right, and that's what we're seeing again today is this lack of critical thinking and so forth, playing into the rhetoric that we're seeing coming out of this administration.
Yeah, we're dealing with the ultimate extremists in Donald Trump right now. And hopefully in November, Joe Biden will put an end to it. Guess who I'm voting for?
That's all right. I think we're all with you.
Well, good. I didn't let any secret out, then.
All right. Well, it's official endorsement from Ron Stallworth going for Joe Biden. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Stallworth. We truly appreciate your time.
My pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you, gentlemen.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Thank you again for listening. Make sure you head to my Patreon page at patreon.com/Loki Mulholland. Show a little love if you can, and get access to even more content. Until next time, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable.